What is your personal why and how are you manifesting it in Cognome?
My why is what's going on, what's interesting, what's changing the world.
What is your framework that helps you interpret the world, understand it better, and make decisions?
I call it a whiteboarding sales process, a PowerPoint sales process, and a PDF style process.
What's a question that entrepreneurs should always be asking themselves?
For me, what's the worst that can happen? Are you able to get through it? Do you have the drive and the imagination to keep going through it?
Good day, dear listeners. Steve Prida here with the Management Blueprint, and my guest today is James Green, the CEO of Cognome, a healthcare company that is solving the problem of how to manage different AI models that are being deployed in healthcare today. Earlier, he worked as the vice president of Disney. He worked directly under Steve Jobs at Pixar, and he has had at least 6 other CEO positions in edtech, media, and healthcare. Welcome to the show, James.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, super excited. And, Steve Jobs, you don't often have people that have known Steve Jobs. Now, even Tim Cook has resigned.
Yeah.
And it's 13 years, I guess. Steve Jobs is being gone. So what was it like working with the man? Was he a difficult boss?
First of all, most of the things you hear about him are accurate. So it's not one of these things where you hear a lot about Steve Jobs and actually the man was totally different. So most of what you've heard is true. And I'll give you one short anecdote sort of before we go on, which is something that I always found incredibly impressive about him. When you work for him, if you disagreed with him and you said, hey, you want it to be white, I want it to be black, without hesitation, he would say something like, hey, here's 7 reasons why you're wrong. First of all, before we go into those 7 reasons, what's impressive about that is he had a number and he stuck with it and it happened in seconds and he didn't know before. So if you think about that, it's hard to keep all of that in your head. So the guy was just super, super clever. And then he would list them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you'd be out. Like, it's done. It's like, oh, damn. So yeah, he was an unbelievable human and it was an honor and privilege to have worked with him.
Yeah, well, that's awesome to talk to you, having worked with him and have some direct experience. Definitely not an easy boss when they have 7 guns to shoot you down.
Yeah. Yeah.
But a lot to learn. I mean, you learn from these kind of bosses the most.
Yeah.
So let's get into the question, which is normally the first one, but this one an exception, which is, What is your personal why and how are you manifesting it in Cognome, James, and in your previous jobs?
Yeah, I thought about this a lot. I've tried to come up with really, truly what is my why. And what I've come up with is I can't help myself. And I'm going to go through examples of it and what I mean by that. I pay a lot of attention to the world. I pay a lot of attention to what's going on. I get very, very seduced by new ideas and new things and things that I think will have big impact. And once I start thinking about it and thinking about what that impact is, I cannot help but start getting involved in it. That sounds very abstract. So I want to try to make that super concrete. So when I was working at Pixar, for example, the internet was born. This is the late 90s. I couldn't help myself. I started an ad serving company called Sabella Media. That company got sold to 24/7, got sold to a DoubleClick, which got sold to Google. So the internet was there. I had to do it. I had to have something in it. And then after that, I was thinking about what I should do. And, mobile phones, if you remember, but they were like flip phones texting. The second company that I did was putting content onto those phones. It just seemed obvious to me. I just could not help myself. I saw the opportunity. Clearly, it happened. That company was called Giant Bear, sold to Blue Cora. After that, there was this crazy innovation going on in television, of all things, with effects. Now, again, we take these things for granted. We've got AI creating things all day long. Back in the day, we didn't. So I ran a company called PVI, which is famous for inventing the first downline you see in football games. So that was kind of the very first virtual object you saw in live things.
That's really cool.
Again, it may seem like, oh, that's an everyday event, but back in the day, it was totally not, and I think it opened up football to many more people, no more chain, like everyone knew where everything was. And then if we sort of just fast forward, because there's a few in the middle, but I don't want to bore everyone, to where I am today at Cognome. I wore my little Cognome shirt so I can advertise it all podcast long.
I can do that.
AI is clearly the thing today, but it's not just enough to have, like, for me, intellectually, it's not just enough to be like, oh, then I'll do an AI model. Like everyone's doing an AI model. For me, healthcare is one of the areas that AI will have the biggest impact with, healthcare for a lot of reasons has been a laggard technologically for specific things about how they store data. So it hasn't been adopted things like multi-tenant SaaS because the data has to stay local and things like this. So AI will revolutionize it, and AI will make decisions about whether people live or die. Right. So it's really, really consequential. And so for me, like, how are you going to manage that is a super interesting and intellectual opportunity. And so Cognome, explain our AI. So my why is what's going on, what's interesting, what's changing the world. And the beautiful thing about that is then you have a rising tide raises all boats situation, right? So you're not fighting against a trend, you're with a trend. The whole world is going to rise like this and you can be part of that. That's sort of my why.
Yeah. So it's basically, in other words, it's coming up with revolutionary ideas and implement them.
Yeah, I mean, I want to make an impact in the world. I want to make a difference. I'm not a very religious guy, so I'm not at all religious, actually. So I sort of believe our time here is limited. I want to make a difference. I want to be part of what's going on. And so, yeah, that's my why.
Yeah, tapping into trends. Wow, that's a great. I mean, I don't know if it's a vibe, but yeah, making the most of opportunity to be here and make the most of the impact. That's a huge one. Love it.
Yeah.
So let me then seg to the next one. This podcast is all about frameworks. So the objective here is what's a shortcut that you can teach the listeners that they can implement in their business. So what is your shortcut to success? Maybe shortcut is the wrong word. What is your framework that helps you interpret the word and understand it better and make decisions?
Yeah, this is another thing that I struggled with a little bit. So I listened to all your questions and I tried to make them really personal. I'm trying to give sort of very sort of authentic, this is what I really am doing all the time, as opposed to this is what I'm doing at the moment, or this is what I did for a second. The truth is that frameworks come and go. There are a lot of frameworks in the world. I've used probably 15 different sales frameworks. Mostly I'm in the sort of B2B world. And so there are lots and lots of frameworks you use to sell, for example. But I tried to think about something that a framework that I've used across every single company that I've worked with all the time, and I always use it. And it's about growth. So what I want to talk about is how do you manage a company that goes through growth? Because it is not obvious, and I do have a framework for it. And some of this framework is unlike some of these other frameworks, which, McKinsey or Bain or someone's invented this framework and you're adopting it. This is really pretty personal to me, and I've adopted various little things about it. There are these two ideas that live in parallel. One is in the sales process, where I think companies go through this idea of, I call it a whiteboarding sales process, a PowerPoint sales process, and forgive me for being a little dated, but a PDF style process, something you can't change. And at the same time, they go through these stages where you are a small company, a medium-sized company, and a larger company. Think of it as sort of less than 12, 10 to 75, and 75 to 100 and up. And I've managed all of these sizes. And what's interesting about these is that if you don't have a framework to manage yourself through these stages, you're going to fail. You as a leader will be replaced. I personally have replaced leaders who cannot go through those kinds of things. One of the things I've done in my life is I've sort of been a hired gun for VCs. So they've been making an investment. They've hired me to go replace the founder because they haven't been able to go through it. And so the framework works like this. So when you're starting your company, and this is what I'll call the whiteboard process, what you're selling is a little bit different every time. And the consequence of that inside the company is everyone is doing everything. It's a little chaotic, and it's okay. Like less than 10 people, it's okay. It's okay that the finance person is doing a little selling and the engineer is doing a little marketing. And, it's okay because you only have 10 people, maybe. When you go into a client, you're sort of inventing yourself as you go. Like there's always the first client. You're like, I think we should do this. This is how I'm going to make you some money or save you some money or do something better, right?
You're figuring things out.
Yeah. Right. And maybe there's some pivots in there. Maybe there isn't. Not everyone gets to be Google and get it right the first time, but you'll see. In the end, you start getting things right. And then you go through what I call the PowerPoint phase. So what this is you now have more than 10 people. It kind of isn't okay that the sales guy is doing finance or the engineer is doing marketing. Like you have actually people in their swim lanes. I call it the PowerPoint because you've built PowerPoint, so you've got slides that you can use and it's replicable. But guess what? You tend to tweak them for each client. You're still, you know what? The way you're selling to, I don't make a stupid example up, Home Depot is still a little different than you're selling to Lowe's. Even though it should be exactly the same, it's still a little different. You're tweaking it each time. You're moving slide 3 to slide 7. Sometimes you don't show slide 10. You're tweaking it.
Yeah, I relate to that. Yeah.
And your organization is structured but not completely rigid. Everyone still knows each other in this company. It's up to maybe 50. I think it maxes out at about 75 people. But every single person in the company knows each other. They're all collaborating. You don't need a lot of structure inside the company because there's sort of culture in there to hold everyone together, right? And then you get to the third stage, which I call the PDF stage, where you've figured it out. You sell the same thing. Maybe you have 3 PDFs because you're selling in 3 verticals, but you go into this client has this thing, never changes. Slide 1 is always slide 1, slide 2 is always slide 2, slide 3 is always slide 3. And you have like maybe 100 people in your company. And by the way, now you have levels. So not everybody knows everybody. And as a CEO, I have my lieutenants, and that my lieutenants have people working for them. And I sort of feel like everyone can manage, 5, 6, 7, 8 people. More than that is difficult unless the roles are not very sophisticated. So you need this management layer, which divorces the CEO from the rest of the organization. So you need a lot more structure. And as you go through these sort of 3 phases, and they're really different, a tragic thing happens. It happens all the time. The person that was so helpful in the whiteboard phase and was your go-to man or woman, they don't make it in the 3rd phase because they're a generalist. They liked the chaos. They liked being able to have their foot, and they'll complain to you. They'll be like, why aren't you listening to me about, it's an engineer and says, why isn't sales listening to me? Dude, you're an engineer, stick to your knitting, no. And this culture goes through every single company I've ever run. Most of them have gone through these 3 phases, small, medium, and large. And one of the things that I try to do with the employees in these phases, and this is also sort of part of the framework, is to give a huge amount of latitude to see if they can succeed in the phase. So to give them the freedom, if you're being mean, to give them enough rope to hang themselves. And if you're being kind, to give them the freedom to be who they are and to be the best they can be, and to support them and not control them. And so if you are aware of this framework as you grow and you give that latitude and you hire smart people, then you can see which are the ones you keep, which are the ones you don't. And honestly, it is the worst and hardest part of managing through growth, is that selection and weeding out process of the people who worked in the first stage and don't work in the last stage. So that is the only kind of framework for me that has stood the test of time, has worked in media, worked in healthcare, worked in various other places. Does that make sense to you? Does it resonate with you?
It's absolutely. And I was just working on a chapter in my new book, and I was actually working on this very idea of why some companies are never able to grow up, because they are not able to make these decisions, these painful decisions, as you described.
Super painful. The worst. It's the worst part of firing people is the worst part of being a CEO. If you enjoy that, you're a bad CEO. You want to have a positive environment, so you want everyone have a good time. And, when there's growth, usually there's incredible optimism and great culture. So any CEO who enjoys that process is not a good CEO.
Yeah, that's so true. And this is kind of a difficult thing. You have to be ruthless to some degree.
Yeah.
To go through that phase.
But that's why this framework has helped me. And it's helped me be gracious and kind to the people, where you're like, I'll just call them Jane, right? The totally fictitious person. But you can go to Jane in stage 3 and say, like, Jane, do you remember how much you loved it in the first phase? I'm going to give you some time here. You're going to leave, but I'm going to give you some time to do this little special project. But you need to find your next little startup because you love it. And I am going to put this bureaucracy in place, and you're going to fight it till the day you die. So I can't have you here. Like, I just cannot. I can give you this little thing to do, and you can have some weeks to go do that and give you some time. But the framework helps you be gracious and helps you make those decisions as you grow.
Mm-hmm. That's an amazing framework. This is really unique. We have recorded, I think, close to 400 episodes with different frameworks, each one, but this has not come up. Anything similar hasn't come up. So,
woohoo!
It's worth wondering it. So where are you now in your business? Which phase are you in?
I am in between the whiteboard and the PowerPoint phase. Maybe because I'm an optimist, I'm going to say I'm in the PowerPoint phase. But I know there's still part of me that's still drawing shit on the whiteboard. We have 12 people. So we're just at the edge of growing out of that phase. I don't have that layer in the middle. We have half a dozen clients. I suspect that at the end of this year, we'll be fully in the PowerPoint phase. And it'll be another 18 months after that until we get, and that's assuming that we do grow. I mean, my whole raison d'etre is to find these really special little things and then grow them and make an impact. So let's hope that that happens.
Yeah, well, you had some practice in the previous 6 CEO positions, so I'm sure that you
Yeah.
figure this out. So what drives growth in your business?
Yeah, this is a little bit going back to phase one. So I've picked an area that's growing by itself. I mean, AI, there are more and more models being deployed in hospitals. Hospitals are growing the number of models deployed in them at 2.2 times the rate of the general population. So good for me. There is federal regulations that are coming that saying you need to control what your AI models are doing. That's good for me. It's a lovely day when regulation is good for your business. Usually isn't, so. But it's not unusual in healthcare. We look at electronic health records, that was driven by government regulation and funding for those things. So this is a little bit like that. Federal, state, and various other institutions are sort of driving that. And then there are some things happening inside the healthcare organizations themselves that we can tap into. I always think when you're selling, you should have a good story. And so I'm going to tell you the story that, if we're going to meet with the chief information officer, we tell them stories like the ones I'm about to tell you. And this really helps us tap into that growth. And because part of growth is in a B2B institution where a B2B is having a good sales team and having a good engagement and good frameworks about, do they have budget? Are you talking to the right decision maker? All of those kinds of frameworks, which to me are much more tactical. I've used a lot of them. We go into them and we say things like, have you ever experienced radiology where they just released a new model and they never told you about it and now you have to monitor it? This is happening. And so they're like, oh my God, yes. And then they tell you a story about it. And then you're like, what about that note from CMS? That's the people who run Medicare and Medicaid for your users who are not inside healthcare. Did you hear that they're coming down and audit some of your peers? And you're like, oh my God, we just got the notice that we're being audited. And then how about your board? How's your board doing? Are they coming down saying, what are you doing in AI? So you try to tell these stories and then you create this tension where they have to grow and they have to control. And then that's where we come in. We can help all of these companies manage all of these models. What we do, we have this product called Explainer AI. We tap into the underlying data from the electronic health record, the EHR, the medical record. We tap into the models, the front end and the logging files behind it. And then we can tell whether the model's exhibiting drift, whether it's how it's performing across various areas. They could be geographic areas. They could be demographic areas. Is it performing the same with young men and old women? Is it performing the same over time? Is it degrading? Is it releasing personal health information when it shouldn't? Is it hallucinating if it's an LLM? That's what we do. And then we can send alerts out to people saying, hey, listen, this model is making shit up right now. You better go deal with it. And then they can talk to the vendor and deal with it. So we're in a good space. And so growth is, to some extent, this idea of a rising tide raises all boats. I've picked an area where it's growing so I can grow with it. And then part of it is being connected and having a good way of engaging with people who are buyers. And so we have these stories that we tell in our decks about how we help in these situations.
Have you had to pivot between the original idea and where you are?
Yeah, we have. And for anyone who's listening, who's like, oh my God, I'm going to have to pivot. I use Google as my favorite example of someone who's just got so lucky. They're like, we're going to have this little thing that says we're going to search the internet. And they never really changed until they got so big they could do extra. That is such the exception and not the rule. We started, and what's interesting about the way we started is it's still a core differentiator for us. But we started with the ability to take data from an EHR, from a medical record, and translate it and store it in a common data model. It's called OMOP, O-M-O-P. It's the sort of most common way that researchers do it. And we thought this tech would be widely adopted by researchers. We have contracts with people like, I don't know, Hopkins, Ohio State, NYU, big institutions, but it's not big enough. It's not growing fast enough. Mm-hmm. And what it does do, though, is for our Explainer AI, it enables us to have the tech, and it's a moat, have the tech to be able to connect to the source of truth, the electronic health records, so that you can get actuals versus predictions. Many models cannot get the actuals out of the EHR, right? So they just say, this is my prediction, this is my prediction, this is my prediction. And over time, that's great, that's your prediction. But how did it ever go and match up against what actually happened, And so we have this way of, because it's where we started, of really efficiently and accurately getting that information. So it's still the bedrock, but it's definitely a pivot.
And then you basically put AI layer on top, and that's great. And how did you know when to pivot? How do you reach the tipping point? How do you know that this is a tipping point? I have to pull the plug on this. It's not working.
First of all, I think on a personal level, I'm always late. So I think I could always have made this decision earlier if I'm being self-critical. At a high level, and I don't think that if you have a cleaner way, I'll tell you how I done it. If you have a better way, I want to know. It's about sales engagement. So you've gone to 100 people, you've had 100 meetings, and you've sold 2. That's not good enough. It's just not good enough. And the 2 were complaining. What you want to see in a product, and this is true, I think, of all great products, especially in today's age. I use examples like Facebook and Tesla as examples of this. Products are pulled, not pushed. If you still find yourself after 9 months being pushing and not having the momentum to have your product pulled, you're wrong. You need your clients to be making referrals, and you need to be being pulled. In today's advertising world and marketing world, it's too noisy. Maybe back in the 70s you could do it, but it's just so noisy to have a pure marketing, especially in the B2B world. There's so many people selling to the people you want that they have to really hear about your product, have people around them recommending it and pulling you in. There's some time, and I usually take closer to a year, which is long. It would be better for me to do it in 6 months or 3 months. I haven't found a way to do that where you pivot if you're just not getting traction, basically.
Yeah. Okay, I love it. So what's one thing in your company that you're trying to figure out right now?
One thing in my company that I'm trying to figure out right now, I think further ramp up sales. I'm cheating a little bit here because I think we have it figured out, but leaving you with an unanswered question is maybe not as helpful. So we were having, and still are having to some extent, problems getting explainer AI to roll out, right? So people were interested in it, but they wouldn't buy. We're trying to figure out why. And one of the reasons we found is, so for those of you of your listeners that don't know, healthcare is probably the largest portion of GDP in the country. Buyers are very large. We don't think about it, but if you think about it a little bit, you're going to the doctor. It affects 100% of the population. And these large institutions, a hospital is usually a multi-billion-dollar organization, and there are 6,500 of them in the country, right? So, got 6,500 multi-billion-dollar companies in the country. Right? It's crazy, right? They don't want to buy from little companies. They want to buy from big companies. This is one of the things we found out. So we would get to the finish line and say, yes. No one tells you the truth, right? So no one's telling you, I'm not buying you because you're small, but we ended up through triangulation figuring it out. And so we have been building partnerships. We started out with Intel. We made some of our models work on Intel CPUs. So I'm pretty proud of that work, actually. It's for the nerds out there, the Xeon 6 chips, the Granite Rapids chips are locally run LLM ensembles, which is, think of it as Quinn and Llama, to run inside their chips. That's running, I'll call them a small medium language model, not a large language model, up to 32 billion parameters, running on a CPU, not a GPU. So that's a big deal. Intel loves us. And so we were able then to use their ecosystem to have some of their partners sell our products. So now you've got HPE selling Explainer AI. You've got Lenovo selling Explainer AI. Now, probably my favorite partner, love you, E+. If you're listening, I think you're the best. They're a Fortune 1000 reseller selling Explainer AI. So now we have large companies selling our product, and that's beginning to show some, it's coming to fruition now. It's not solved because, my revenues are not going boom, because then I would be firmly in the PowerPoint slide heading towards PDF, but it's looking really good, and I'm very excited.
Cognome inside.
There you go. Cognome inside. Yes. Cognome inside. Intel inside, for those of you that don't remember. Yes.
Love it. Okay. So before we wrap up, I have one more question for you. A question that entrepreneurs should always be asking themselves.
I think the hardest thing about being an entrepreneur is dealing with the amplitude of the variance that happens inside it. There are incredibly high days and there are incredibly low days. There are days where you don't even want to get out of bed in the morning. You don't have a lot of clients and one of them has just told them that you're a complete moron. Even if you've got the best product, the best thing in the world, if you're in this whiteboard to PowerPoint phase, you're making mistakes. Like you just are. No one's perfect. And so are these days where some combination of a client, an employee, and a product has left, fired, not working, and you are feeling awful. And so what I'd say to entrepreneurs is if if you really are an entrepreneur, it is your personality that you can still get through those and wake up in the morning and say, I believe in this. I know I can do it. I can keep doing it. And one of the things that I think separates an entrepreneur from someone who's not is when I go through these things, I say to myself, what's the worst that could happen? And I usually start with, is anyone going to die? And the answer to that's almost always no. No one's going to die. So it's not that bad. And by the way, I remember telling that as advice to a young person, and I saw their face go white, and I'm like, oh, that's not an entrepreneur. Like, that's that person when they're like, oh my God, really? You think about the worst things that could happen so that you can deal with the best? I'm like, yes.
Does that person applies to the company itself? Is the company included in that person that might die in the question?
To me, that would be the next question. Is an individual going to die? Is higher stakes for me than if the company is going to die. But yes, is the company going to die? That is certainly a step on that, because you're going through all the consequences. Am I going to lose all my money? Is the company going to die? Are certainly escalations of that. But to me, company death is less tragic than a human death.
Yeah, true.
Not everyone might agree with that, but I think so. Yeah.
You can pay again.
Yeah.
You can have another company.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so your question was, what's a question that an entrepreneur should always be asking themselves? For me, turning that upside down and inside out.
It can happen.
Yeah. What's the worst that can happen? And can you get through it? Are you able to get through it? Do you have the drive and the imagination to keep going through it? That's the thing that I have continually found myself asking myself, as opposed to any other sort of existential question. And I think some of the other questions, whether like not a good way to look at it is this the best business? Because there's a very, very big difference between an entrepreneur and an investor, right? So an entrepreneur has to keep going when an investor might quit. Investors, they're playing the portfolio game. They're like, yeah, it's not working. I'm quitting that. I'm going to keep this. An entrepreneur, you can't play your time. Elon Musk is running 4 companies, so okay, fine. But most of us are not. Most of us are running 1 or 2. And we have to have a little more tenacity to make it work, to pivot or to, continue to find another path than an investor. And that's a really big difference between an entrepreneur and other kinds of people. And it's why I've kept doing it. It comes back to the very first question. Why do you do this? I can't help myself. I cannot help myself. It is what I like to do.
Yeah. The contrast is addictive. The contrast between the near death and the near nirvana, right?
Yeah. I love it. I mean, you can't have euphoria without depression. You wouldn't know what it was. It would just seem normal.
Just personal example of that. I was in Hungary where I was born. Took part of the election 2 weeks ago.
By the way, I'm so excited about that election for many, many reasons.
The exhilaration that I felt and everyone else felt.
Yes.
It was way better than when the Berlin Wall came down.
Yeah.
Because the system was worse.
Yeah.
And if it didn't have to live through that for 16 years, we wouldn't have had that. Now, we didn't feel it, but
But even as I said at the beginning, I'm a student of the world. I I'm paying attention to lots and lots of things. And certainly I was following that one very, very closely. Even I felt euphoria for that. I'm like, that's great. I was at the dinner table. I'm not Hungarian. It's not affecting me. It's not, Viktor Orban isn't really not having any effect on my life at all. Maybe he goes to some conferences in the US, but, still not affecting me. But I'm at dinner with my wife and kids. And I'm like, did you hear what happened today? It's great. Anyway.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you're on that side of the equation. James, if people would like to learn more, they would like to learn about Cognome, connect with you, where should they go? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can certainly go to cognome.com. You can email at info@cognome.com. But, if you've listened to this podcast, I'm always happy to take emails. I answer every single one of my emails myself. And if you know my name, which is on the screen here, James Green, you put a dot in the middle and at cognome.com at the end, that's going to get to me. Delighted to hear from any of you. Especially if you are a CIO in a hospital, you should call me.
Well, all those CIOs, hospital CIOs, please call James or at least send him an email and he'll give you a call. And those of you who listen to this, it was an amazing framework. The whiteboard to the PowerPoint, the PDF, definitely relatable. And if you're not dying, then it's okay. You can always pivot and live for another day, to fight another day. James, thanks for coming and thanks for listening.